Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 6 of the 8-day Healthy You program. Let me take you to the slides. I hope you are able to see my slides. Yes? Okay. Thank you. All right. So, welcome to day 6. Congratulations for having made two-thirds of the journey uninterrupted. So, every morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. So, be in the present and try to make best use of each day. So, with those words, today, as I said, we have a lot of things coming up. We are going to talk about FOMO, strength training, intermittent fasting, something which a lot of people would be interested about, steroid abuse, oxytocin, female loss of libido, pregnancy diabetes, OSA, pubertal changes in boys and girls, especially for those who want to know about for their children, the habit we were talking about, temptation bundling, Garbate and Ikigai, Pieces and Life Hack, and the book called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. So that's quite a number for today. So let's get rolling. The first thing is going to be on FOMO. The reason it was FOMO was not initially in the part of the scheme of things that we had done, but after taking 2 or 3 batches of classes, I realized a lot of people suddenly were not getting up and doing things. And when I contacted them, they said that they felt guilty and then they thought that others are doing so well. They have not done this. They have not done the vision board. They have not done the affirmation. So we feel bad about ourselves. So slowly, they secluded themselves, and that is called a FOMO. FOMO is basically fear of missing out. Okay. So two things are important in FOMO, which is the fear of missing out, meaning that others are enjoying life or they are able to do things which we are not able to do. And two things are there. One is decisions, and second one is social comparisons. Okay. So FOMO is a fear of missing out. Now, how do you get into this? What is FOMO? Basically, you have a goal, like you want to lose weight or something, and there's also a situation you are right now, like you have delivered only 3 months back. Now, the first thing is you need to see whether both match. That are you in a situation where you can make your goal possible? If it is so, you feel good about it. If it is not so, then you have to work on that. You have to change your behavior to make your goal and situation match better. So either you change the situation or you change the goal for now. So you change your behavior, and that way you will not compare yourselves to other situations and others' goals. Okay, so it is not only the goal that is important, you also need to evaluate your current situation. So now how to overcome this fear of missing out is very quite simply, you have to identify your life domains. Like, what do you want to change? I want to change my personal fitness. I want to change my capacity in my profession, or I want to change my relationship. Something you have to identify your life domains. I will show you the life domains next, and note why each domain is important to you at this point of time. So do not take all life domains together. Like, I want to improve my friendship, I want to do something for society. If those things are not very important, you take the domains which are important for you right now, and then look into what goals you can set in each domain. Okay, over a 3 month period, over a 1 year period, over a 5 year period, whatever way, you set some goals for each domain. For example, I want to lose at least 1 kilo per month for the next 6 months. Set a goal. Then consider why you are pursuing any goal that does not align with your thoughts. Like, say, for example, your thought is not about right now about hmm, financial planning, and then you wanted to enroll into a course for 6 months on financial planning. then you'll be stressed out because it is usually right now it is not your most important for you. So look into it that your goals are in alignment. Otherwise, revise your goals and rank your top 5 goals or top 3 goals, whichever it is. For example, when you're talking about what are your domains, the domains usually are what is physical, what is emotional, what is intellectual, meaning something to do with your intelligence, and what is spiritual, religious and spirituality. Okay, these are your inner goals, and then comes your outer goals like parental, marital, or social, with the parents, with the partner, and with the society. Okay, and then comes your professional goals. Vocation is your profession, a vocation is your hobby, and then finance. Okay, so what are you as a being is your core thing. What do you relate to is your the others, the social, marital, parental, and what are you doing is the other thing, your profession. So these are the domains that you can look into. Which ones do you want to improve upon? This is from the World Health Organization on the concept of quality of life. Okay, and they said there are different domains which you can consider, like physical, psychological, your level of independence, social, environmental, and then comes your personal values and beliefs. Okay, so you need to find out that where are you right now? What is the individual's perception of where she stands now, like after delivery, or just I've just completed my course, something like that. And where are you in context of what, either to your society or to your friends, and whether it is in relation to your goals, expectations, standards, and concerns. So, depending on all this, you make your own decisions as to which goals to pursue, which goals not to pursue right now. Okay. So, to overcome FOMO, get your goal right, get the evaluation of the situation right, and then get the behavior right. All right. So, keep in mind that people on social media always seem happier than they are. Yes, they do have back pains, they have dentist appointments too. They just do not post about them. FOMO comes down with age and maturity. I hope it helps to calm some people to soothe the nerves. That's about FOMO. Let's now come to exercise. So I said there are 3 main types of exercise. One is cardio or aerobic, second is strength training, and third is flexibility, yoga, and so on. So yesterday we spoke about cardio or aerobic, about walking and all that. Today we'll talk about strength training or resistance training. Do women need to do strength training or resistance training? Strength training helps to protect your bone loss. We'll talk about bone loss tomorrow. It helps to strengthen and protect against bone loss. It helps to build muscles and tone you. So why should you build muscles? If you don't build muscles, you will look flabby. If you build muscles, then you get your shape. So that is why you need to build muscles. And what is the day-to-day things that I do where I can strengthen? Like lifting groceries, getting up from a chair, climbing stairs. All of them are gravity, anti-gravity muscle strengthening. Now, how much of strengthening exercises should I do? Well, the guidelines say strength exercises for all the major muscle groups like the legs, hip, back, chest, abdomen, shoulders, and arms. But remember, strength training should not be done every day. It should be done for a maximum of 2 to 3 times per week with at least 48 hours in between gap. Strength training you should not do every day. Strength training you should give the muscles time to relax. So to start with 1 set per session. So how to get started? So focus on the form, not the weight. So align your body correctly and move smoothly. Start with no weight, then start with lightweight routines. Concentrate on the slow, smooth lift and equally controlled descent while isolating a muscle group. For example, if you're doing for your uh, biceps. So not the weight is not most important. Whether you're doing it properly is what is most important. So focus on the form, not the weight. Second is the tempo. The tempo helps to stay in control. So for example, count to 4 while lifting a dumbbell. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then hold for 2. Then count 4 while lowering to start the next position. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the tempo helps you to keep it going. And breathe. Usually, when you push, you breathe. You exhale. When you pull, you inhale. When you release. Okay. So when you're trying to put some effort, you breathe out. When you are trying to pull in, then inhale. So count your tempo allowed. You cannot hold your breath while you are talking. Okay. So when you're exhaling, you can talk. When you're holding your breath, you cannot talk. When you're inhaling, also you can talk. So keep challenging the muscles, keep changing the muscles, choose the weights wisely, do strengthening exercise usually under the supervision of a good trainer. Give muscles time off for 48 hours, meaning for full body strength, you can do at 48 hours gap, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But if you're doing only the upper body, then you can do upper body today, lower body tomorrow. Then Wednesday, you can do again upper body. So you have given 48 hours off. So that is about exercise. The other thing to which we are going to talk today is about circadian rhythm fasting or intermittent fasting. Okay. So there's evidence that shows that intermittent or circadian rhythm fasting, when combined with a healthy diet, lifestyle, and fasting, can be an effective approach to weight loss, especially for people at risk for diabetes. Okay. This is about intermittent fasting. Now, by doing intermittent fasting, there are 4 things that you can better yourself. One is avoid sugars and refined grains. Second is let your body burn fat between the meals. Do not snack. Be active throughout your day and build muscle tone, as I said, with strengthening. And consider always a simple form of intermittent fasting. We'll come to the different forms of intermittent fasting. And then avoid snacking or eating at night all the time. Every day, try to avoid eating at night time. You can eat only during the period of time. In intermittent fasting, it's you eat only during a particular period of time. So there are different regimens by which they eat. One is called the 16 is to 8, meaning after 24 hours, you can eat only within an 8-hour gap. So some people eat between, say, morning 10 to evening 6. So they can eat only between this time. Rest of the time, they can only drink water, black tea, or black coffee. Only those things are allowed. So only between 10 to 6, they eat. Okay, after 6, there's only water or black tea, black coffee. This is a daily cycle where it is 16 hours fasting and 8 hours of food. The other is called the 5 is to 2, which is in a week, you do 2 days fasting and 5 days you eat. Or it can be an alternate day fasting and eating. Okay. Now this is the 5 is to 2 diet for a 7-day, where 2 days instead of fasting fully, you reduce your calories by half. So you eat normally, then you eat half the calories, then you eat. This is traditionally what we do on the Hindu side, where they do on Tuesdays and Fridays fasting. Or Tuesdays and Fridays, they are partially fasting till the afternoon or till evening. They don't eat something like that. So this is the traditional 5 is to 2 diet. This is the alternate day fasting. In the sense, you eat one day and then you eat either less or completely you are 24 hours fasting. So this is alternate day fasting, which is a bit difficult. So these are different regimens. And this is the most common, most popular, which is called the 16 is to 8, where out of 7 days, each day, you divide into hours. So 16 hours means some eat between 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock. Within a particular time frame, they eat. Rest of the time, they can drink water or black tea, black coffee alone. So this is called intermittent fasting. So the most common is the 16 is to 8. Now, what is the difference between traditional dieting and intermittent fasting? Well, science says that showing both intermittent fasting and traditional dieting can lead to healthy weight loss. They're same destination but different journeys. And a lot of evidence has shown that intermittent fasting is actually productive in the sense it is able, the people are able to lose weight without much problems. So, what are your top tips for intermittent fasting? Here are the 7 top tips. Basically, drink water, keep yourself busy. You can drink black tea, black coffee. You ride out the hunger waves by drinking this, and give yourself 1 month to see if intermittent fasting helps you. The time that you're eating, make sure you don't binge eat or take high carb or refined food. So follow a low carb diet between the fasting period because the low carb reduces hunger and makes intermittent fasting easier. It may also increase the effect on weight loss and type 2 diabetes reversal. Do not binge after fasting. Just because you're not eaten for 16 hours, do not binge during the 8 hours. So this is the bottom line on intermittent fasting from the Harvard School of Public Health, where they said although there are certain benefits of caloric restriction, they have been demonstrated. It is still unclear that intermittent fasting is superior to other weight loss methods. So certain people who typically eat 1 or 2 meals a day or do not eat for long stretches of time may show better compliance with this type of regimen, but more high quality studies are required. So a strong recommendation on intermittent fasting for weight loss cannot be made at this point of time. But however, it has been found useful, not for everyone, but for some. So it is also, there is no one magic thing. It is a part of a different types of regimen. This is also one sort of a regimen, like paleo diet, keto diet, and so on. So that is about intermittent fasting. I'm now going into endocrinology, where I'm going to talk to you about stretch marks. Are you ready? All right. So stretch marks, yes, we all know about stretch marks. Some of us get it after delivery, after pregnancy. Some of us get it after a workout in the gym. But usually the stretch marks are in the places where you stretch more in the shoulder, in the abdomen, in the thighs, and so on. But stretch marks are usually white in color, and stretch marks, the thickness, the diameter is less than 1 centimeter usually. Okay. I think Swati or from Maya Saman also posted something about stretch marks yesterday. But what I'm talking about is not the white stretch mark. I'm talking about pink stretch marks. Okay. So if there is a pink stretch mark and if the stretch mark diameter is more than 1 centimeter, it means it could be because of steroid excess. So people who are taking steroids, or if the steroid in the body is over secreting, which is very, very rare, in such conditions, you can have pink stretch marks in your body. Okay. So when you come across people who are taking a long time prednisolone, visolone, betnisol, dexamethasone, steroids, or if they do not know that they're taking steroids, but they're taking some alternative medicine or something which has steroids in them for a long time, they might develop these type of pink stretch marks. So pink stretch marks more than 1 centimeter thickness, you should always think about steroid. I'm also taking you into another field of dermatology where we're talking about darkening of the skin. Darkening of the skin over the neck, over the sides of the neck, sometimes over the chin, the cheeks, as well as the underarms. So this darkening is usually a condition called acanthosis nigricans. It can also occur in between the breast and also in the knees. This is called acanthosis nigricans. Acanthosis nigricans, the most important reason is because of insulin resistance. Meaning, if the insulin is not working, the insulin gets it's a I mean a lot of backlog of insulin happens because it is not working. It is produced, but it's not working. So there's excess of insulin. This insulin gets deposited in other receptors other than insulin receptors. These are called IGF-1, like insulin-like growth factor receptors. So it goes and deposits in those receptors, especially around the neck first, and therefore it leads to darkening of the neck. So this darkening of the neck signifies that your insulin is not working properly. It can happen normally in two conditions. One is in puberty, where children develop darkening during 13-14 years. The other is in pregnancy. So both these conditions, it is a physiological darkening of the neck, that is fine. Rest of the time, when you have darkening of the neck, it means you are overweight, and therefore your insulin resistance is more, and therefore you are getting this. It only means that your body is showing you that your insulin is not working properly, which means that you are at risk for diabetes. So people who have darkening of the skin, if this sort of thing which I showed you, you have to look for acanthosis nigricans. And acanthosis nigricans means that one, either apart from puberty and pregnancy, then it means that you are overweight, or you have insulin resistance, or you are at risk for diabetes. So the idea is to lose weight. So if you lose weight, this will go down or come down by itself. All right. So the next topic for today is going to be on the love hormone. People falling in love. So this is the formula for love. If someone was looking for a formula for love, especially the singers, if at all you're looking for a formula for love, this is it. It's called oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone produced by the pituitary, the posterior pituitary. Oxytocin helps in bonding of people. Okay, and oxytocin is also necessary for childbirth and falling in love. What happens when you fall in love physiologically? We talk about falling in love in movies, but what happens when you actually fall in love in your body? Usually they say, you have a sudden bulb going up in your brain. You hear some songs or some ringing of the bells and all that. So similarly, in your body you have sweaty hands, your hands sweat. You have dilated pupils. Okay, there's a racing heart, butterflies in your stomach. The genital blood supply increases. You go weak on your knees. Okay, so falling in love produces hormones and chemical messengers that can create a feeling of chaos and confusion in your mind and body. So these love hormones and chemicals create a state that is biochemically similar to a drug use. No wonder they often call it high on love. So this is what happens when you fall in love. So I'm just trying to glamorize my field of medicine. So oxytocin is something which is secreted when you caress or hug or kiss a loved one or have sex. Oxytocin levels shoot up. A large amount of oxytocin is released during labor, which facilitates childbirth, maternal bonding, and breastfeeding. So, if people for labor, they usually give this thing called syntocin, which is actually oxytocin. So, oxytocin is also released when mothers nurse or snuggle with their children or even gaze at their babies. Okay, it plays a huge role in pair bonding. So, that's oxytocin or the love hormone for you. So how can you bring about your own oxytocin? Which it's incredible that you can activate your oxytocin response by directing love and kindness towards your own self. So you can experience those benefits of increased levels of oxytocin. So that is called the Kattipidi Vaidyam. People who are hugging people. When you hug people, you have more oxytocin and more bonding. You feel better. So simply place your hand on your heart and tune in into the warmth directed towards yourself. Just placing your hand on your heart, you can place it your hand over your heart, and that itself makes it you feel much better. Did you try it? Your hand over your heart, and the soothing it gives is much better. In fact, I think probably I assume that the idea of having a namaskar or a vanakkam is basically placing your hand over your heart, and I think maybe it is to improve the bonding of between people. Okay. So yeah, quickly we went around I think 4 5 topics today in the morning. Have a break, take some water, and get back to us. We are going into uncharted territory after this. Why am I seeing only 3 people with the videos on today? We have 30 people here, 1/10 of them. I think most of you are better looking than me. If I can put my video on, why can't you people? If you want, I mean, there's no.
Hi, doctor.
Hi. Hi, Midhu.
I just woke up. I was hearing.
No problem. Nobody's judging you. Don't worry. You need not
Today,
explain yourself.
yeah, today I'm having off. It's Friday in UAE.
Okay.
So all other
It's 4
days,
o'clock for you now.
yeah.
Oh. Sorry to get you up so early.
Actually, I don't put my video on as I'm in a studio apartment, so lights on, others will wake up. So
That's okay. No, not a problem.
okay, doctor, can I ask some doubts?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I was having prolactin issues, I think in 2018 or 19. Yeah, 2018, I think. So I took a tablet for that for 1 month. So it corrected. My doctor said, you can stop the tablet. So I am not remembering whether it was high or low.
Only be high. For low, they
Yeah.
don't give. Yeah.
Okay. So what lifestyle change I can make so that it cannot go high again?
Prolactin. Midhu, are you married? Do you have kids?
No, I don't have kids. I'm married.
Okay. See, prolactin, as I said, is also necessary for bonding apart from oxytocin. Okay. Prolactin is secreted in the body not only for breast milk secretion, but sometimes as an emotional state also. Okay. So the most common reason for people having high prolactin is taking a tablet for some other reason. For example, you took a tablet for headache, or you took a tablet for some gastric problem, or you took a psychiatric tablet. These tablets can increase your prolactin.
But I was not taking.
I'm just telling you. So the most common reason for increased prolactin is, first you have to rule out whether the person is taking any medication at all. If the person is on any medication, stop all medications and recheck again after 10 days fasting. If it is still elevated, then the first thing we tell them is are they symptomatic? Like, is there any prolactin basically helps you to milk let down from the breast. So if there's any milk secretion from the breast or any watery secretion from the breast, or any symptoms of, like, after delivery, one of the most important symptoms when you breastfeed is you don't have sexual desire. So we ask whether there's any lack of sexual desire and so on. If there's some symptom or there's irregular periods, if there's any symptom, then the next thing we do is go for an MRI brain, directly an MRI brain, just to rule out whether the prolactin secreting part of the pituitary is swollen and is there any small nodule which is producing more prolactin. See, prolactin producing nodule is the only nodule in the brain which can be cured by taking a tablet alone, not going for a surgery. If at all, if there is a nodule. Okay. So, gynecologists usually get a lot of people with increased prolactin, and they immediately, as a knee-jerk reaction, they start people on anti-prolactin measures. But endocrinology are specialists for this, and we will not immediately start on medication. We tend to evaluate for the cause, whether we can find any.
I asked doctor what is the reason. So what she told me was, since you are sleeping late at night.
Okay, that sounds interesting. I have not looked into it from that part, that angle. Maybe I look into it from that angle. But sometimes prolactin can be increased when a person with PCOS, prolactin can be increased. A person who had fits problem, seizures, even after intercourse, prolactin can be increased. So there are different. Sometimes people say that if the pain of the taking blood if is high, sometimes the prolactin can increase. So we need to look into those aspects as well. But we do not, with just one prolactin rise, we do not go for a tablet. From the endocrine perspective, we wait, try to change the environment, try to change all medications, and again recheck again after 10 to 14 days and see whether the prolactin is coming down. If it is still high, then we go for an imaging to rule out a pituitary problem, because sometimes you think it is nothing, but ultimately there's a pituitary problem. And prolactin increase leading to nodules are also seen in men. Men also can get it. They will present with either milk secretion from the nipple or loss of sexual desire.
Okay. And other one is
So sometimes
I
they come
think,
in newspapers also. A man secreting breast milk. That is actually a prolactin secreting nodule.
okay. The other thing is yesterday's class, I think you mentioned about the BPA in plastics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we get the 5-gallon bottle for drinking water.
Mhm.
So I was concerned it's actually transported uh, in plastic bottles exposing to sun, right? So if we
BPA
bought,
has now been banned even in India.
but in here, when I searched, there is only one company which is having bottle BPA free for
Mhm.
drinking water.
Mhm.
So we are not using that. It's Aqua Plus.
No, but I
So
think it would have been a national policy that in the level of the plastic companies itself, they are not supposed to make BPA related plastics. If India has this policy, I think UAE should have been having the policy.
yeah, that's what I wondered. But when I Googled, there is only one drinking water company I found here, which is using BPA free.
Okay. I think I'm not sure, but usually UAE they adhere to the European standards.
Yes, yes.
So I think they should have BPA free, should be part of the regulations for them to get a licensing.
Okay. Then it's cool.
I hope so.
Okay. Anyway, we boil the water and drink.
Yeah.
Even though it's
Good.
thank you, doctor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right then. So let me get you into the next part of the program before we can talk again. So I just try to pin myself. This is a talk which I gave in 2018 to my state endocrine society annual meeting, where they asked me to talk about loss of libido in a female. Uh, for starters, I have also done a fellowship in sexual medicine from Oxford, UK, in 2012. So I am a fellow in the European Committee of Sexual Medicine, but I don't call myself as a sexologist, because otherwise people label us as a sexologist, and I'm not able to see more of endocrine cases. It is all men coming with an erection problem, which is not actually my field of interest. So I have restricted myself uh, more towards that. But after now into practice, and now having already established myself as an endocrinologist, I'm just trying to open up this aspect of my specialization, which I did. But again, this was more of a theoretical knowledge that I gained, not something which we had a hands-on training. It was we had a short 2 week training in UK, after which 6 months later we had a 3 day training in Amsterdam, and then we had an exam, and then that was the part of the fellowship. But I worked with Dr. Narayana Reddy. Dr. Narayana Reddy is one of the pioneers in sexual medicine in Chennai. So I worked with him for 3 months, even before this program, and every doctor would have come across people with a sexual problem. So, taking all this into consideration, I think even then that our experience with sexual medicine is incomplete without having a psychotherapist or a psychologist who can help with the sexual related problems, because most of these problems are relationship issues. Very rarely do you come across hormonal issues or organic issue. Most of them are relation driven. Now, having said that, when you're talking about loss of libido in a female, I would say almost all of them are because of a relationship issue rather than a hormonal issue. But having said that, if at all there's we have to first rule out a hormonal issue before we can say that it's a relationship issue. But loss of libido in a female will actually extinguish a race. Just think about it, that if the female is not willing for a reproduction, the race will then become extinct. So it's very important part of continuing to the next generation. So when people come with this, I'm talking about women who come with loss of, I've lost interest in sex. The first question you need to ask them are they distressed about it? In the sense, is it of concern to them? If they say there's no concern with that, I was busy and all that, then that's not a problem. But if they're concerned about it, meaning I really want, but I'm not having an interest, then we need to look into what is the problem. We have to go into the physical examination. Then you have to see whether it's a biomedical problem like a hormonal problem, or a psychological problem, or a socio-cultural problem, or a relationship problem. Psychological and relationship. Psychological is basically intra-person, within the person, issues like body image, that I've lost weight, I've grown fat, all those things. Or a relationship issue like have a conflict of between the partners, so on and so forth. So this is one questionnaire that we use for people who come with loss of sexual interest, about the patient identification, about the partner, the quality of the relationship, what is the main complaint, what is the current complaint, previous treatments, gynecological and obstetric history, and then sexual history of all usual sexual history, then current emotional status. Then they look into the sexual response cycle like desire, arousal, orgasm, impulse, fantasies, masturbation, and satisfaction. And then about the male partner sexual function assessment, then the female partner sexual function assessment, and finally a diagnosis after doing certain tests, and whether these people require an intervention. So this is how a usual questionnaire is done. But usually this type of a questionnaire, most doctors do not do it, but this is one type of a model questionnaire which can be done. And how are you supposed to talk to a person who has a problem? We use the PLICIT model. PLICIT model is first giving permission for them to talk about themselves, then giving a limited information. So for example, permission in the sense, example of what to say to the patient is, thanks for sharing your complaints. Many postmenopausal women report a decrease in sexual desire, and therefore give a patient permission to speak about her sexual health and do what is she is already doing sexually. That's the permission. Limited information is giving provide a basic accurate sex education about what is sexual response cycle and what is the impact of aging on hormones, anatomy, and so on. That's about the limited information. Then there's a specific suggestion, like provide a simple suggestion to increase the sexual function, like emotional intimacy, lubricants, and so on. And then there's intensive therapy. Even if with that it's not able to work, it doesn't work well, then you validate the patient's concern, refer to a subspecialist for sexual psychology counseling and so on, or for a sexual consultant. So a female sexual desire or an arousal dysfunction. Desire is basically lack of interest. Arousal also is the same thing. So it is rarely an organic problem. Organic problem, there's a bodily problem. In the bodily problem, we have to see whether it is a gynecological issue, it's a hormonal issue, or any other drugs which she is taking, say, for example, hypertension tablets, they can reduce the desire and so on. Or it's a physical problem, or it's a psychiatric issue, or a psychological relationship issue. So that's about the female sexual problems. Just giving you a gist of how we go across those things. I think we already spoke about pregnancy diabetes, one aspect of pregnancy diabetes the other day. This is the other aspect of pregnancy diabetes, that any person who develops diabetes for the first time during pregnancy, it's called pregnancy diabetes. Okay. And usually when you're checking for diabetes during pregnancy, it is very difficult for you to say a random or a after meal sugar, whether it is normal or not. What you can say is any fasting sugar above 93 during pregnancy is abnormal. That's what the books say. This fasting above 93 sometimes can be very misleading, because we see a lot of pregnant women having fasting above 93, but when you do a glucose challenge test, the rest of the values are normal. But they say anybody who has a fasting sugar above 92, which is 93 and above, you go for a GTT. If the GTT is normal, but the fasting alone is still high, then put them on a diet of low carbohydrate, diabetic diet. Okay. Otherwise, other people, if the fasting is within 92, they do a GTT, or during the first visit they do a glucose challenge test, and then again by the 7th month they do a glucose challenge test. Glucose challenge test is they give 300 grams of glucose in 500, yes, I think 75 grams, I'm sorry, 75 grams of glucose in 300 ml of water, and they're supposed to drink it within 5 minutes. So they do a blood test before drinking, and then 1 hour and 2 hours after drinking. So that was about pregnancy diabetes. I'm now taking you more and more closer to things which are at home, closer to the bedroom, like snoring. So snoring is something which a lot of people encounter from their partners, or they get complaints about themselves. We might just brush it off, but snoring has to be looked into seriously, because snoring could be a symptom towards something more sinister. So there's something called obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA. Okay, obstructive sleep apnea can lead to compression of the windpipe. Okay, and therefore when you're sleeping, the tongue falls behind, and therefore you're not able to the airflow is not proper, and therefore you can get snoring. So you have to see either a pulmonologist, a lung specialist, or a ENT specialist when you have snoring. They will do a sleep study and see whether you have obstructive sleep apnea. That is, the oxygen saturation dips when you are sleeping, when you have snoring. If there is a dip, then they will tell you what to do. Because untreated obstructive sleep apnea can lead to sudden cardiac deaths or sudden cardiac problems, because the oxygen to the heart also goes down at that point of time. So this is about obstructive sleep apnea, where you see air goes into ourselves through the nose as well as through the mouth. The tongue is usually supposed to fall back when you sleep, but not that much that it obstructs the airflow. But here you see that the tongue falls back and obstructs the airflow, and therefore air has to pass through a very narrow lumen, and this can lead to a lot of sound. Okay. Snoring. So what they do is they do a sleep study. When you are sleeping, they attach to a meter and look for various parameters, including your oxygen dip and all that. This is called a sleep study. And after the sleep study, if you have obstructive sleep apnea, then they put you on this one called continuous airway positive pressure. Meaning this positive airway pressure is attached to your face. It gives air into your mouth, and therefore it prevents the tongue from falling behind and obstructing. Although it looks grotesque to you to see, a lot of people who put this then say that after many years they are sleeping well. They had a sound sleep. Because otherwise what happens, throughout sleep they are like, and then they stops grunting for some time, and then suddenly there's an obstruction, like, and then they do the same thing. Okay, so they have a very disturbed sleep, and therefore in the morning they're not feeling fresh. Sometimes when they're driving they sleep off. Okay, so obstructive sleep apnea, you have to do a sleep study and put them on CPAP if required. And once they are on sleep app, only then you can plan for weight reduction. This is called CPAP, CPAP, CPAP. In children, sometimes they snore. Some of them have something called adenoid hypertrophy. We know about the tonsils. Tonsil is in the mouth. Adenoid is in the nose. I come across a lot of obese children. And when you ask them, people say that they snore. The other thing we need to ask them is, do they snore with their mouths open? Or when they're sleeping, do they sleep with their mouths open? If it is so, then we have to suspect adenoid hypertrophy. Meaning, adenoid is found, as you can see, just behind the nose. So any increase in size of that adenoid is a normal lymphatic tissue which is necessary for your body, just like your tonsil. So when the adenoid is increased in size, then the airflow from the nose is less. Therefore, there's an obstruction at the level of the nose. So the child breathes by opening its mouth. So they do mouth breathing. Okay. So if there's mouth breathing, you have to check with an ENT to see whether there's an adenoid hypertrophy, in which case they'll give a drops or they can go for a surgery. Because if you have an obese child with an adenoid hypertrophy, they have mouth breathing. If you do not take that history and ask the child to do physical activity, increase physical activity and all that, it is not possible. The child will not do it because it is like your nose has been clipped up. Your nose has been clipped. How can you do a physical activity? You are only breathing through your mouth, and if you do physical activity, you cannot breathe through your mouth. So the child will not do it. So you have to first find whether there's any obstruction, relieve the obstruction, and only then you can plan for a physical activity. All right, so we again going into another field, which is a very endocrine specific field, which is called puberty. Puberty during for anyone is a very wonderful phase of life. Uh, Adolescence is that phase of life which separates human beings from other animals, and puberty is the process by which, from a child, a person becomes an adult. So the different phases of adolescence. If you look into this graph, this is a very wonderful graph which shows the development, both physical and mental development of human beings over the last 20,000 years. And the one which they on the pink one is the mental maturity, the violet one is the physical maturity. You see that in the last 200 years after industrial revolution, people have had more food, access to more food, and therefore they are they have good nutrition, and therefore they attain puberty earlier. Once people attain puberty earlier, meaning they are physically mature earlier, but still their mental maturity is not that much because they're not exposed to the outer world for a longer period of time. Now, this is a mismatch between the physical maturity and the mental maturity, and this can lead to abuse of the person. They can get into a sexual relationship and abuse and so on, which can be of concern. So it's very important that physical and mental maturity go hand in hand. This is a graph again which shows that the age of attaining the first periods in the 1850s was 16 years, and in 2003 it was 12.5 years. So within a span of 150 years, the age of attaining your first periods has come down drastically by around 3.5 years. And the reason for this is, what do you think the reason for this is? Any idea?
Consumption of non-veg.
No, it is just nutrition. Not only non-veg, access to food. See, previously people were starved. In India, they used to eat only 2 times a day. So eating 3 times a day, eating rice 3 times a day itself is a big thing. So it is access to food because of industrial revolution and so on. Now, this is a graph which shows how puberty occurs. Okay, what starts first? In women, the first thing is breast budding, followed by pubic hair. Sometimes it is not pubic hair, it is the growth spurt. Then they have a pubic hair. Then there's a change in the shape, the change in the habitus. And then they have their first periods, which is called the menarche. Now, okay, some of them develop underarms hair after that. And then the breast goes through different stages. It's called Tanner staging from 1 to 5. So from one stage, they come into 2, 3, 4, and then finally the adult stage by around 17 to 18 years of age. So this is how puberty progresses in a female. So the first is the breast budding. Now, the important thing about this is that these are the stages of puberty development. First is the breast budding, then the height spurt, then the pubic hair, then the menarche. Sometimes the menarche and then the pubic hair. But usually the breast and height, sometimes it's the height first and then the breast. But the breast and height are the first to come. And then you have the other things like the hair development and then menarche, or the menarche followed by the hair development. So the word about the underarm hair. The underarm hair is not from the other pubertal hormones. It is separate. It is separately from the adrenals by a hormone called DHEA. So even if a person does not develop underarm hair, it will not affect their pubertal development. Okay. But if a person develops underarm earlier, we have to evaluate for the adrenals. Okay. So this is an exclusive endocrine topic, the underarm hair. So let me now come to an important practical question to you. As a woman, this is something you should know for your children, especially your daughters. At what age will you say that the first sign of puberty has occurred? When will you say it is late, or when will you say it is early? if someone tells you that their daughter has features of puberty, at what age do you think it is of concern that they should see a doctor, and at what age do you think, okay, this is normal? This is what I teach uh, girls in colleges, because a lot of time this is a girl talk. It doesn't come to the doctor's attention a lot of times. So people should know about this. You see, certain very important, very basic things we don't know, like what is the normal blood sugar. As I said, any sugar above 140, you have to be concerned. So the basic things we should know. Similarly, for women, if someone tells you my baby is now developing some symptoms, how do you know that's normal or not? I told you the first symptom is breast budding. So at what age or beyond what age do you think is it normal? Can you put it in the chat box, please? Remember, okay, someone has put 12, 13. See, remember, I'm not telling about the first periods. I am telling about the first sign of puberty. Period is not the first sign of puberty. You have breast budding as the first sign of puberty. It takes 2 years of breast development before you have your first periods. Okay. So I'm asking you, after which standard in school do you think that if a child develops breast budding, it is normal? At least by definition, worldwide. Well, let me tell you the answer. The answer is 8 years complete. So you might think 8 years is too soon, but when you take the global average, they say above 8 years, they can have the first stage of breast development. So 8 years is which standard? Third standard. Okay. So anybody who develops breast development after third standard, which is meaning fourth standard and above, is okay. It's okay, but fourth standard is still a little bit early, but it is within the definition of okay. But even then, in fourth standard, it's better to see a doctor. Okay. But fifth standard is definitely fine. So the idea is any child 8 years and above who develops breast development is fine. So that by 10 years she'll get her periods, because it takes 2 years of breast development before they get their periods. Okay, and I tell you how you mature. See, the first thing is for maturity is your nutrition. If the body has enough nutrition, okay, if the body senses, the brain senses that you have enough nutrition, then what happens? It looks into your bone age. The bones have good nourishment and they are in congruence with your age. For example, if you are 10 years, the bone should also be 10 years. There can sometimes be a bone age delay. If you're not eating properly or if you have a hormone problem, there can be a bone age delay. Meaning you can be 10 years, but the bone age will be 7 years. The body's pubertal system will kickstart depending not on your age, but on your bone age. Okay. So if the bone age and your age, your chronological age and the bone age should be in congruence, they should be together. So if the body thinks that, okay, this child has enough nutrition, a bone age is above 8 years, then it kickstarts puberty. So the first kickstarting of puberty happens in the brain. The brain fires a signal, okay, and then it comes to the pituitary. The pituitary then starts producing hormone. It spits out hormone. The hormones come in the blood. Okay, they go to the ovaries. Now there are two ovaries. The ovaries receive the signal. Okay, and then the ovaries start to slowly improve in size. And the ovaries already have a reserve of millions of eggs in there. Okay, so the ovary starts to stimulate these eggs, and each month one egg is stimulated, but that is later. Initially, the ovary grows in size and is the process of stimulating these eggs. And at that point of time, what happens? From the ovaries, the next hormone is increased, which is estrogen. Okay, so ovaries produce estrogen, and the estrogen then has its first effect on the breast. So the breast development starts. Then slowly the breast increases. There are 5 stages in breast development. When the breast increases to the third stage, then the uterus starts to increase. Okay, so once the breast development and the uterus are adequate, then they have the first periods. So this is how puberty starts. So it starts with your nutrition, then the brain starts firing, and then it goes to the ovaries. The ovaries then improve and increase, and then they will signal the next hormone, which is estrogen. And then the estrogen leads to the breast increase in the breast formation. And once it has gone past a particular mark, then you have your uterus development. So if there is a problem with attaining the first periods, we need to know whether the problem is at the level of the ovaries or at the level of the brain. So that's what we evaluate and find out where the problem is. Now, I was talking to you about early puberty, or at what age a person can have puberty. Tell me at what age, beyond what age, if the person does not have periods, are you concerned? Beyond, if you to make it easier, beyond which standard in school? Yeah, beyond 10th standard, meaning 15 years. Okay. So between 8 to 15 years, they should go undergo this process of puberty and attain menarche before 15 years. So a lack of breast development by 13 years of age, complete lack by 13 years of age, or there is breast development but they have not attained menarche by 15 years of age, both of them, they have to be evaluated. So I think this is something that women should know. Between 4th standard to 10th standard is the time for puberty, very simply. Anything below 4th standard is abnormal, anything above 10th standard is abnormal. Okay, so let me share one story with you. Okay, I had a child was brought to me from a very far off place. She was in 2nd standard. She was 7 years old, and she had huge breasts. She was wearing braziers to cover them up, and she was brought by her mother, father, and grandfather. She had breast development for the past 1.5 years. Okay, from the time she was in 1st standard, and the first thing the parents did was ask the grandmother, and the grandmother said it is okay. So they did not bother about it. But slowly, the breast increased in size to such embarrassment that she has to wear a brazier in her dresses before she can go to class. And by 3rd standard, she had her first periods, and therefore they were concerned, and then they came to me. On evaluation, clearly this onset was beyond what was normal, so I had evaluated the child, and we found that there was a big tumor in the brain, which had actually kickstarted the puberty earlier. So then we went for a neurosurgery. We gave injections to stop your puberty, and then we went for a surgery, removed the tumor, and we suppressed the puberty with injections for 4 years. And then once she was her age was around 10 years, we removed the injections, and then she had her periods like just like others. So why should I do that? Why should I not let them have the periods? It's two things. One is a psychosocial problem that they are not mature enough to handle themselves. They can be ridiculed in school and so on. So it's a psychological issue. One. Second is once you have puberty, your height will increase only for the next 2 years. So once you have your first periods, after that your growth is only for 2 to 3 years maximum. So a person who gets early puberty, the growth, the bones, the space between the bones will fuse within 2 to 3 years, and therefore they cannot grow after that. So they might have a relatively, although they have a height potential of more because of their father and mother being tall. If they have early puberty before this age group, they will be shorter. Okay, so the height is also lost. Now let us come to your sons. What happens to your sons? Pubertal changes in boys. The first sign of puberty in a boy is the testis enlargement. So people are more concerned about the penis. we get at least once in 3 days. I get a boy who's been brought by the grandmother. It is always the grandmother which brings the grandson, saying that his testis is the penis is smaller. Most of the times we are less concerned about the penis. We are more concerned about the testis, which is in the scrotum, the two balls. So the first sign of development in a boy is the size and increase of the testis. Okay, it's because it is such a subtle thing which is happening. Not many people even realize that. For women, it is obvious; it is in the breast, but for men, it is in the testis, and the boy himself will not realize that. If he's not being based by the parents, they will also not realize that. So testis enlargement should happen after 8 years of age. The same 8 to 15 after 8 years of age. Then they have the height spurt. They suddenly grow in height, and then they have the. So what happens is, first again the brain gives the first signal. It goes to the testis. The testis enlarges in size. The testis produces the next hormone, which is testosterone, and then testosterone leads to change in voice, facial hair, widening of the chest, and all those things. So sexual hair and voice, and then finally adulthood. So that the penis development occurs only during the third stage of puberty. So when people come to me with a boy saying that they have a micro penis, the first thing we look is into the testis. And the boy is above 8 years, 9 years, we check what is the testicular volume. So we have this beads. We have this wooden beads, and this is called Prader's orchidometer. Orchid means testis, orchidometer, meaning looking at the size of the testis. So any volume of more than 4 ml means testis of more than 4 ml means the child has entered puberty. So we look for whether the child has entered puberty by looking at the testis. If it is more than 4 ml, they have entered puberty. And then they progress 5, 6, 7, 8. So we monitor the child and see whether they go into late puberty and then adulthood. So increased testicular volume, not penile size, is the most important thing. But yes, you can have problems with the way the penis is formed. Maybe the tip is not at the urination is not at the tip at the end. Such type of penile developmental problems can sometimes be because of a genetic or a hormonal issue also. But they are not what determine puberty. And finally, about the growth rate in boys, I put here on the x-axis you have the age, on the y-axis you have the height, and you will see that as they develop, sexual maturity improves. The 2, 3, 4, 5 are the different stages of sexual maturity, and you will see that between 3 and 4, the height spurt occurs. The sexual maturity 3 and 4, the height spurt occurs, and by around 17 years, the height stops. Usually, the boys have their puberty 2 years later than the girls. So if it is 8 years although by definition it is still 8 years for boys, usually in boys, puberty kickstarts by around 10 years or 11 years, the first sign of puberty. By 13, 14, they have their height, and by 15, they get into their facial hair and all that. By 17 years, their height stops, usually. So this is about adolescent development in boys and girls. On the left is for girls, on the right is for boys. And you can see that the growth spurt, the peak height is delayed. The puberty is also delayed by 2 years in boys, and the peak growth is also delayed in boys. And that is why you see that girls are taller in 8th standard, whereas the boys become taller in 10th standard. And this difference in height, this is between the boys and girls, that the height peak is different. And this is the reason why boys are taller than girls. Usually, the average difference between boys and girls' height is 12 to 13 centimeters. And the reason is because puberty starts delayed by 2 years in boys. And before puberty, they grow at the age at a rate of 6 centimeters per year. So 2 6 centimeters makes it 12 centimeters, and then they go into puberty. And therefore, they have this 12 centimeter advantage in boys. And this 12 centimeter advantage is what makes men taller than women. So the pubertal delay in boy leads to an advantage in height, because once puberty sets in, then your height stops within 2 to 3 years. I hope this is valuable to you. Let me also finish with the last one when you're concerned with your sons. A lot of people also bring their children, especially boys around 12, 13, 14 years, saying the boy has developed a breast development. Now, during puberty, testosterone is produced, and testosterone, some of them change to estrogen. Okay, if the boy is obese, then a lot of conversion happens, and therefore they might develop breast like sagging of the breast and all that. So it is a normal phenomenon even in boys. So if a boy develops a breast development, 12, 13, it's called, usually it's a pubertal breast development. And if they're obese, we tell them to lose their weight. But if it continues after some time also, then we evaluate for other causes. But we look for by 14 years, by 13, 14, we also evaluate whether the boy has entered puberty or not. If they're not entered puberty and they have breast development, then it is of concern to us. I think we already spoke about this acanthosis nigricans, darkening of the skin. And finally, we come to behavior change about finding yourself. This is the 3 layers of behavior change when people talk about what I had also told you. The first is the core. Find out who you are, your identity. Second is the process. And finally, your vision or your goal. So don't be too much obsessed about the outcome. First, be obsessed with your identity, and then the process, the outcome will take care of itself. Like, for example, people are always obsessed about losing weight. Losing weight is the outcome. The identity is, where are you making a mistake? Like, if I'm feeling stressed, what do I eat? Or do I stay awake in the night? If I'm feeling hungry, what snack do I take? First, identify yourself, and then instead of this snack, can I change it to this snack? So do the process, and then you get the outcome. So the idea is to start. It is not about what people want to achieve, but more about what they want to become. Once people focus on the identity, they will use behaviors that are likely to act in accordance with that. For example, the identity which has been drilled into our minds is that of a doctor. Okay, so whenever I get up or go anywhere in society, I consider myself as a doctor, and therefore I have a societal role as a doctor. That anyone has heard, I am supposed to go and look after them. Similarly, you will have a societal identity. So if you create your internal identity, for example, if you say XYZ is a person who is more into natural ways of healing themselves, then you will always look into yourself as how you can heal yourself naturally. So first create your identity. So the goal is not about the result. The goal is about creating your identity first. Because once you focus on identity, then you'll see where you're going wrong, change that whatever is needed to get into that identity, and then the process will fall in place, and then you'll get the results. Now, having said that, let me take you to habits. Today we're going to talk about the third habit, the third law of making a habit, which is to make it easy. The first one is to make it obvious, second is to make it attractive, and third is to make it easy. It should reduce friction. There should be a less number of steps between you and your good habit. So you have to prime your environment and prepare your environment. For example, if you want to write a book, okay, keep a book with a pen near your bedside, and make sure every day you are supposed to write one sentence, just one sentence. So the habit should not be more than 2 minutes, and it should be very easy. It should not be you have to go to the second floor, get the book, get the pen, and then write. It should be nearby, and it should be easy. Similarly, if you want to go for a walk, you should always have the shoes ready, and you should have a socks by your bedside. Okay. So the idea is, as soon as you wash your face and freshen yourself, you have to just wear the socks. That should be the idea. So what happens when you wear the socks, then you decide, okay, I cannot be walking with the socks, I have to wear the shoe. Once you wear the shoe, you decide that I cannot wear the shoe and be at home, so I have to go outside. And when you're outside, you decide I might as well walk. So that's how it should be. It should be very simple. The idea is get up and wear the socks. Okay. So this is called the 2-minute rule. Downscale your habit until they can be done in 2 minutes. It should be very less. For example, if you want to do workout, you are only supposed to do 5 push-ups, just 5 push-ups. So if you do 5 push-ups, then you will feel, okay, let me do 5 more. Don't think that you have to do for half an hour. Or if you want to walk, you say, okay, I will walk 100 steps, just 100 steps. And then when you do 100 steps, you'll say, okay, this is very small, I'll do another 100 steps. Okay, make it very small, but make it consistent every day, 100 steps. Then automate your habits. So making it easy is very important. For example, if you want to be an early riser, or if you want to start exercising, or you want to become a vegan, they've given you what you should be doing. Examples of the 2-minute rule. Okay. For the early riser, first thing is be home before 10 p.m. They say 10 p.m. Right now we are in a COVID situation, but I would say be home by 8 p.m. Then have your dinner, have all devices, electronic devices away from you by 10 p.m. Be in bed by 10 p.m. and wake up early, like 5:36 in the morning, and lights off by 10 p.m. So these are simple ways of getting up early. For starting exercises, first thing is only change into your workout clothes. Second thing is leave your home, take a walk. Third thing is going to a gym, then exercising in the gym, and then exercising regularly. It's not necessary that you should go to the gym. This is just an example. And to become a vegan, first start eating vegetables at each meal. Do not stop non-veg. First start eating vegetables. Then stop eating four-legged animals. Four-legged animals meaning beef, pork, and mutton. Then stop eating two-legged animals like chicken, turkey. Then stop eating no-legged animal, which is fish. Then stop eating all animal products. So this is a small way of how you can approach it. So there are many such examples given here as making it easy, a habit how to make it easy. For example, if you want to run a marathon, you walk for 10 minutes. That is the idea. Wear a socks, walk for 10 minutes, just 10 minutes. You do it for 1 month, 2 months, 10-minute walking. Then 10 minutes, you make it 20 minutes. Then 20 to 30 minutes. Then make it step count. 3,000 steps, 7,000 steps, 10,000 steps. Then you start running for 100 meters. Then run for 1 kilometer. Then run for 5 kilometers. Finally, you run a marathon. So the identity is that I am a runner. I will run for 100 meters. So the other idea is called temptation bundling. Temptation bundling is, for example, you can watch your favorite show only while you're ironing or only when you're jogging. So that's your favorite show, but the catch here is if you want to watch that favorite show, then you should not be seated. You should be standing and you should be walking. So that it is a temptation bundling. Okay. So you can also combine temptation with the habit stacking. One habit followed by the next habit. For example, after I drink water, I will walk for 5 minutes. After I drink water, I will walk for 10 minutes. Habit stacking. So temptation bundling and habit stacking. So habit stacking is after I pull out my phone, I will do 10 push-ups. Temptation bundling is like after I do push-ups, I will then check Facebook. Okay. Finally, to the Japanese philosophy, we have only one philosophy today. It's called Ganbate, which means always do your best. Okay, always prepare, give it your all, be on time, and importantly, be yourself. Ganbate is always try to give your best. The app for today is called Fabulous. Fabulous involves exercise, inspiration, productivity, meditation, yoga, stretch, and so on. It's a paid app. I've tried it. It looks good. You can try it if you want. The other thing is about Life Hacks. Life Hacks is an app which looks into different aspects of how you can have shortcuts to different aspects of your health and productivity. The book for today is called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, a bestseller, where they talk about the 7 habits. First is be proactive, you are in charge. Second is have a plan. Third is put first things first, which means work first, then play, prioritizing. And then it's a win-win situation. Always plan for a win-win situation. The fifth habit is seek first to understand, then to be understood. That is listen first. Habit 6 is together is better, which is synergize. And habit 7 is sharpen the saw or balancing all these things. Take care of yourself. So all these things come under the 7 habits of highly effective people. Thank you. Thanks for being here. I hope I've given a lot of information for today. I hope it's of value to you. Thanks again.